Hey everybody, welcome to week number 6. Number 6 is action-packed week as we are getting close to the end here. So be prepared. We've got quite a bit to cover. So first thing you need to do is cover off on chapter 13, do the assignment, read the chapter, do the assignments, which is going to be helpful because the test that was going to cover chapters 9 through 13 is due on this coming Wednesday, the 24th, by the end of the day. It's got a similar feel to the first test, so you should have a better idea what to expect and better idea how to prepare for it. It's 60 questions, and you have a similar amount of time to finish as you did with the first test. So you've gone through it once. You kind of get good thing is you only have to take the first test one time, and then the other ones are so similar. They're just easier to prepare for. Okay, but that will also include chapter 13, so you want to get that done as well. And then that'll wrap up our unit on capital budgeting, and we're going to start getting into some various finance topics, important ones, but they're you'll learn about some other things in those other chapters. Okay. And as you can also see, we are going to cover off on chapter 19, but then next week we're going to cover off on chapter 19. But we're also going to start to get our heads around a very, very short group project. It is not time consuming. But you'll want to work with your group to actually do that assignment, which is coming up here very shortly. Not next week, but the week after. And but it's never too late to start getting yourself organized for it. Okay, so and the way to do that is you can tell which group who is in your group is under the groups tab in D12. So if you find where the groups tab is, you'll find out which group you're in, who your group mates are, and show some initiative, get yourself organized. So that when you actually come up to do the project, we have that kind of stuff taken care of. Okay, so and people actually really enjoy the project. That I've done this in classes now for a few years, and people really enjoy doing it. Okay, all right. So let's take a look at the chapters you're going to cover off on this week. So your wrap up chapter on chapter 13. Let's take a look at that. As I mentioned, chapter 13 kind of wraps up our section on doing capital budgeting and sort of how it all comes together in the decision-making process, what actually gets used, and how these things are looked at from a management perspective. So chapter 13 is risk and capital budgeting, so kind of, again, it's sort of the capstone to the unit that we're working on here. So by the time you're done, you want to be able to explain the concept of risk and how it's measured. You understand then that most investors are risk averse, which means they dislike uncertainty. And if there's any uncertainty there, they consider that an element of risk. Why investors will require higher rates of return for projects that they deem risky. And the use of simulation models and decision trees to assess the risk of an investment. There's lots of things going on here. This is actually advancing at a pretty rapid rate with all the data that we have available. It becomes a little bit easier to do these things, which is actually quite helpful for financial planning. And then you want to be able to assess the impact of a given investment on the total risk to the firm. So all those components come into this kind of capstone of capital budgeting and saying how we go about doing that. Okay, so that's chapter 13. You'll take the test again on Wednesday, and then by Friday you want to have covered off on chapter 16 and 17, which are looking at, in the case of chapter 16, we're looking at long-term debt and lease financing. Kind of an odd combination, but when you read through it, you're going to understand that there's a kind of a similarity between them. A lot of major corporations in particular do long-term debt through bond issuance, and we're going to talk about what goes into bonds, a very important financial concept here. Again, mostly for larger corporations, but any large entities, including government agencies, have the same thing. So you want to be able to explain why analyzing long-term debt requires consideration of the collateral pledged and the method of repayment. So all the components or the agreements, all the tenets of the agreement, actually need to be put in place so you can actually value what the debt is worth. You explain the importance of bond yields and bond analysis and how bond ratings are determined. Very important elements to doing bond issuance. Determine whether to call in or reissue debt, refunding the obligations when interest rates decline. So it's a little bit like refinancing a house. If you see that the interest rates have really declined, you might want to rethink the high interest and high cost debt that you have out there and try to find a way to call that back and reissue at a lower interest rate. You want to be able to identify the similarities between long-term lease obligations and debt, which seems kind of an odd thing. Once you read through it, it'll make more sense. And you also want to be able to recall that when a firm fails to meet its financial obligations, it may be subject to bankruptcy. So we're sort of looking at some of the legal aspects of our financial decisions as well. Okay. In Chapter 17, we will talk about common stock and preferred stock financing. Common stock, sorry, I'm going to get to that thing. I didn't click on it. All right. So, we know we've heard about stock before, but stock is, amongst other things, a legal agreement with where the ownership of the firm is. So it's important that you recognize that common stockholders are the owners of the corporation and therefore have a claim to undistributed income, the right to elect the board of directors, and have other privileges of ownership, which is kind of interesting. This is a total side story, but I always thought it was interesting. Apple had famously put on the most spectacular stockholder meetings, and I knew people who bought a share of Apple stock almost like a ticket to get into those annual shareholder meetings because they put on quite a show. They talked about a lot of things that were happening with Apple, and so if you are one of the disciples of Apple, it was worth buying a share of stock so you could be involved in the shareholders meeting. Anyway, so those are all the things that come. So when we talk about different financing options, we talk about some of the legal aspects of it. And in the case of equity, we're talking about, and by the way, these are not just agreements that that organizations have with their shareholders. These are, especially with publicly traded companies, heavily regulated by government agencies as well, primarily the SEC. So any one of these options has various legal aspects to it. An interesting thing, we're going to look at cumulative voting, how that provides minority stockholders with potential for some representation on the board of directors, sort of a union, if you will, of stockholders. And then recall that a rights offering gives current stockholders a first option to purchase new shares. So if a company is going to issue more equity in the form of stocks, the existing stockholders often have the option to purchase those new shares. Explain why poison pills and other similar provisions may make it difficult for outsiders to take over a corporation, particularly a publicly traded one, against the management's wishes. So it's the way of management to. There are investors out there who call these hostile takeovers. They would go in and buy up as much stock as they possibly could and try to get get representation on the board of directors. If not, actually get to the point of having majority shares so that they basically control the agenda of the company. And quite often that includes, if they go through all that trouble, they see the opportunity to change the direction of the company, which of course the existing management probably is going to be real interested in. And then we're going to talk about how preferred stock compares to debt and common stock. So again, these are all options. Interesting chapters, some good homework assignments with those. 16 and 17 and 19 are the chapters on the optional last test in the class, which is basically extra credit. So any of the points that you generate from that last test just get added to your point total. And I believe that test is worth 10 points, so that's a whole letter grade. That's you could potentially add to your grade at the very end of class. So pay real close attention to 16, 17, and 19. Okay, a lot to cover. Good luck with the test, and good luck with getting through the work this week. Okay, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and ask. And finish strong.